Reconsider Christ podcast provides real-life examples on how Christ works to interact with our lives. Our guests paint on the canvas of life their stories of joy, heartache, struggle, and victory. You will learn more about the true nature of Christ, for it is time to reconsider Christ. I am not making this up. Kimberly Krueger, the founder of Fellowship of Extraordinary Women, takes us through amazing hurdles and challenges and poor decisions and good decisions and bad decisions, and shows us how Christ was present every step of the way, ready to help and give His grace and mercy to her. Her parents divorce at age 10, and Kimberly starts down a road of anger and rebellion. As a teenager, her main goal is to personally destroy her life through drugs, sex, and alcohol to get back at her parents. Next comes the out-of-wedlock baby at 17, which ironically brings her back to Christ. Then the next 18 years bring a dysfunctional marriage to an addict turned abuser and 10 more children. After divorcing, Kimberly was driven back into poverty as she reared the 10 kids still at home. After all this, Kimberly begins to find her giftedness in coaching, a husband she deeply loves, and an unbelievable confidence in Christ. Fellowship of Extraordinary Women empowers women to live extraordinary lives with monthly forums, leadership conferences and retreats, keynote speaking, while enabling women authors to publish their books. You will thoroughly enjoy this podcast and be inspired. Hello, Kimberly. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Gene. Welcome back. Thank you for having me.
As I told you in our previous talks, I'm just so excited to have you on today for people to hear your story and your relationship with Christ and your trusting Him throughout these various stages of your life. Just an amazing story. And it's been encouraging to me. I've told it to my kids, my wife, everybody I talk to. They go, "Who's this Kimberly person he keeps talking about?"
Wow, thank you.
So I'm going to personally email this podcast to each of them and have them listen to it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that's an honor.
Tell us, we always start with our guests with, what are your first recollections of Christ and your memories of early childhood?
Well, like many Christians in America, my first recollections are of those flannel storyboards in Sunday school, growing up in church. And my mom, I just remember her loving Jesus and singing the loudest during worship. And my sisters and I moving down the aisle away from her as she sang because she couldn't hold a tune. And we would say, "Mom, can you do it a little quieter?" And her answer was always the same: "I'm going to sound so good in heaven, girls." That's what she was saying. And so, Jesus was real to her, and He became real to me too. And I often say I probably asked Him into my heart 10 or 20 times, during those altar calls when you're 6 years old and you just want to make sure one of them sticks, you keep doing it. Mm-hmm. So I got saved a whole bunch of times when I was a kid, Gene.
It's obvious one of them stuck, so congratulations.
At least one of them stuck. And with everything I went through, I probably needed every one of those times under my belt.
Yeah. Well, and then with your first challenge at 7, so kind of walk us through 7 through 10 in your life.
Yeah. So when I was 7.5, my parents sat us down and my dad announced that he would be leaving. And my mom was in tears. My older sister, I'm one of 3. I'm middle child of 3 girls. And my older sister started bawling. And I was just very confused because my dad traveled for his work. And I thought, well, he leaves all the time. And I had no idea what they were alluding to. I wasn't old enough to understand that this meant divorce. Mm-hmm. And, long story made short, after 3.5 years of separation, my dad actually came back twice. And ultimately, the divorce was final. That moment when it became final completely changed everything for my family. My mom had been believing God and on her knees for 3.5 years that her husband would come home to her. She did not want this divorce. And she believed God said that restoration was His promise. And you know what? I bet He did. But it wasn't necessarily the restoration she wanted. And so when my dad ultimately made it final, my mom kind of walked away from God. She felt very betrayed in every way by her husband, by her God, by her life. And at that time, before the divorce, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was very engaged in parenting. And then as soon as my dad left, she had to go back to working full time. So we were basically orphaned. We had babysitters all the time. We hardly saw my dad. And the real shift for me was my foremost memory of that time wasn't a feeling of loneliness, because I think loneliness is one thing. It was a feeling of aloneness. I spent so much time feeling completely alone. And that actually ended up following me all the way through my teen years, well into my adult years, until really the Lord himself healed me of that feeling of aloneness. And it was such a powerful feeling that I could be in a crowd of 500 people and I felt completely alone in the world. It had nothing to do with who was around me, who I was in proximity to. It was what I call the sting of abandonment, and it stuck with me for decades.
And so what was going on in your mind? You're young child going up into the preteens, and your mom had been very fervent about asking God, for this restoration and for the marriage to heal. It doesn't. And then your life just gets extremely difficult. All of a sudden, all this aloneness that you felt. What's going on between you and God and Christ during those years?
Well, thankfully, during my mom's, I'll just call them her on fire years. So she was on fire for God. I did encounter the real and living God. In my little 10 years old of experience, I encountered God. And I didn't just, hear lots of testimonies and go to prayer meetings and go to church and all that. I actually felt rivers of living water come rippling through my entire body at the age of 10. And I remember walking to school the next day with my best friend, who was my neighbor, and school was in my backyard. So we always walked. And I said to her, something happened last night. I met God. I felt him. And I remember telling her and thinking like, oh my goodness, I'm doing what I read about in the Bible when the apostles would go and tell people that Jesus was real and that they could encounter him right now. And I was like 10 years old going, I'm doing what they did, and it became so real to me. And then when that shift happened where my mom, just flipped a switch, we didn't go to church. All that whole culture of Christianity left my life. And the only thing I had left of that were my memories of who God was and what I had experienced, and the fact that we still had Bibles sitting around our house and plaques with Bible verses. But that was it. All of a sudden, we were living as if we never went to church. We were doing things we never would have done when we were church going. And it was really then that I became what, as I described, an angry child. And now that I look back on it, I can see that what I was doing was I was essentially saying to my parents, you know what? I'll show you. I will destroy me to get back at you. And I truly think that's what kids who act out in anger are doing. They're saying, I'm going to act out to teach you something. And not knowing as a young person, as a child, that the person you're hurting most when you act out of anger is yourself.
And so God in Christ kind of went on the back shelf. And you had this anger, which made total sense as a young teenager. I'm going to get back at my parents.
Well, and as I said, Gene, we left God, but God never left us. And it wasn't until years later that I was able to look back and see how he never left me, and how that aloneness really was just a feeling. It was not my reality. But this anger, this I guess mission I was on for just self-destruction led to drugs, led to alcohol, led to poor school attendance, bad grades, and you have to keep in mind, I'm a student who's being put in advanced classes. I'm being tested for gifted and talented. And by freshman year of high school, I was getting a 1.6 GPA. I mean, I just wasn't showing up. I wasn't doing the work. I didn't care. I was just trying to have fun. I was going to just go to the next party and do this and that and the other thing. And so by the age of 15, I'm involved with a serious relationship with a boy, and I end up pregnant. And this was really life altering for me in so many ways.
Yes, and that is a fascinating story in itself. So obviously, you make a decision between the two of you. He's not going to be the ongoing father of this child, but you're going to have this child. And
Yes.
walk us through that process and the transition that brought in your life. And this is all, I mean, this is all you. There's no influence other than this new child in your life and the memory
Yeah.
of a long time ago. Walk us through that, because it's
Yes.
fascinating.
So as I said, we left God, but he didn't leave us. And so there were just like 2 or 3 times in those angry years where I was desperate and I needed God's help. And I would say, Lord, help me. And so my only prayer really from, I would say, like 12 to 18 years old was, God, Lord, help me. And I prayed it a handful of times, and he always helped me. He always helped me. It just was like, I knew I didn't deserve it, but he did anyway.
Do you
And
have an
here I am
example in your
finding,
mind that you remember?
yeah, there was this one time that I was being really like hardcore bullied in my high school. I was a freshman, and this girl I didn't even know just started bullying me. I had no idea why. And one day she would say things and try to, like, just get a reaction. But one day she tried to pick a fight with me, a physical fight in the hallway at school in between classes. And I mean, I got into a lot of trouble, but I wasn't like getting into brawls. Okay. That was a whole nother level for me. And I was wearing a skirt this day, Gene. I'm like, all I could think about is she's going to throw me down and the whole school's going to see my underwear. Like, that's all I could think about. Like, I mean,
Well, that's a freshman. That sounds logical.
I know. I was 14 years old. And so I don't even know how I got through this moment. And before I knew it, 75 or 50 kids were surrounding us going, fight, fight. And I'm just going, my underwear. I was just mortified. And thank God a teacher came and broke it up. And I thought, this girl, she's going to find me and she's going to get me. I knew, like, I was hunted. Like, now I felt like prey and I was going to be hunted. And I was physically ill, emotionally ill. I was just sick. And I began to say, Lord, help me, help me. And I was such an angry person. I was probably doing and saying a lot of those same things to other people in my world out of my anger. And here someone's doing it back to me, probably so deserved. And the Lord intervenes. And I end up down in the guidance counselor's office, where I just went there to talk to my guidance counselor and just to feel like I might have some support. Well, guess what? She's in his office because she's one of his students too. And he finds out I'm in the waiting area, and he comes out and he says, guess who's in my office? And he goes, I know why you're here. And he says to me, you know what I think? I think the two of you would make great friends. Are you willing to come in the office with me? Long story short, we became friends that day, great friends. And she went on to be expelled from school for much more serious crimes. Yeah. But we were friends from that day forward. And so fast forward to, I find out I'm pregnant. I'm 16 years old. And I know that this boy that I'm with, he's not a man, he's a boy. Not that I was a woman, I was a girl and he was a boy. And I know that he is very dangerous. Nobody knew at the time that he was abusing me. And he was even physically abusing me during the pregnancy. And I was keeping all that quiet. But here's what happened. I'd lay in bed at night and I'd think about how I grew up without my father. And I would just cry my eyes out to the Father in heaven and say, please don't let my child be fatherless. Lord, help me. So my Lord help me got an added prayer to, please don't let my son be fatherless. And lo and behold, I give birth to this baby. And all of a sudden I look at him and I'm thinking to myself, what was okay for me, like that really toxic, abusive relationship, is just not okay for him. And so I broke that off. and was truly a single teen mom. Hadn't even graduated high school yet. I was in the summer between my junior and senior year when I gave birth. And it was all about a new beginning. And I knew that I had a choice to make. My mom raised me with these beautiful Bible stories where she sat on the couch and read to us. And I had been spending my life going to parties and just having fun. And everything was about fun, fun, fun. And I literally pictured taking my baby to these parties or sitting down with my baby and reading him Bible stories. And I knew I had a choice to make. Yeah, he was a gift of God's grace, all right. And that's what his name meant. His name is Jesse, which I just was stuck on because Full House, duh. You know, I just was like, Uncle Jesse was the coolest. And remember, you guys, I was 16, okay? I was a kid. A year later, he's 1 year old, and I'm just in the grocery store checkout line, and I see this book of names. And I open it up to see what his name means. And it says a gift of God's grace. And I think in that moment, when I deserve grace the least, God gave me the gift of new life. This new life caused me to change my life. I stopped, flunking out of school. I became a responsible person. I began to save money, support myself and my son. I became more respectful. I stopped, I ended that relationship. I just began to make better choices, and choices I was not on track to make before I became pregnant. I can tell you that right now.
Right.
My destiny without him would have looked very, very different than my destiny with him. Mm-hmm. So I tell my son, he's 33 today, and I tell him all the time, your destiny was to save lives, and the first life you saved was mine. And I tell them, not many people can say their destiny began in the womb, but you can.
Kimberly is a new mother at 17, and yet it is amazing how she takes these challenges and struggles, and through the birth of her son, actually turns back to Christ. And as she turns back to Christ, she begins to have a new resolve in building the relationship with him. You would think now that it's smooth sailing from here on out, but as you suspected, it is not. There's another 18 years of dysfunction and turmoil ahead. There's the blessing of her children and rearing them and experience with them. And yet at the same time, there's the 18-year marriage to an addict who turns into an abuser. As we turn to her life chart, we see something a little bit different than most of the graphs that we have discussed. First of all, her career doesn't take off until later in her life, as she spends the first part of her adulthood taking care of the 11 children. As she has successfully reared those children in very difficult circumstances, her career then takes off through her public speaking and the founding of the Fellowship of Extraordinary Women, which is now a global organization. Along the way, though, you see that her relationship with Christ started strong when she was 7 to 10, but then took a deep dive as she went through her angry rebellion in teenage years and then her early adult years, figuring out again how Christ could be a part of her life and how he kept stepping in to help her. And also along the way, we see her life circumstances were extremely difficult. It's amazing that she has been able to come through them with the grace that she now exhibits. And as she goes through all that turmoil and those hurdles and those challenges, we suddenly see her circumstances pick up and parallel her relationship with Christ. There's one other thing I like in this chart. See the dotted line that goes across the top? I put that there just to represent that throughout this entire process, Christ was right there, taking care of her, watching over her, and ready when she was ready to take the next step. It's an amazing story. Then, so what now? You're in finishing high school. I believe it's when you start going back to church, and walk us through those years.
Yeah. So being a young believer, even though I got saved at a young age, I didn't know what it meant to walk with God. But I did know that I needed church. So of my mom and my sisters, I was the first one to go back to church. And I just packed up my baby boy and found a local church and showed up on Sunday mornings, and then found out there was a young adults Bible study. And so I started to attend that. And all that was about the first year of my son's life while I was finishing up high school and so forth. And I began to pray for that father that I longed for my son. And it was in this church and at this young adults Bible study where I met my first husband. And, this is a word to the wise. I believed because I met him in church and he showed an interest not only in me, but in my son. And he was a person of faith, that he must be the answer to my prayer. I didn't know that there's an Ishmael that looks like the answer to your prayer, and there's an Isaac who is the answer to your prayer. And so just going on my silly 17-year-old logic, I just went, this must be him. And I just dove in head first. And we were married 5 months later. And I had another baby on the way because I'm a slow learner, Gene, at the wedding. And again, a baby Christian.
We got a small group now attending the wedding.
Right.
Jesse.
So,
everybody.
Yep, I think I was, a few months pregnant at the wedding. So we just dove in, and he thought I was an answer to his prayer. I thought he was an answer to mine. And then we had a third baby. So now we have 3 children. I'm 20 years old. I've been married 2 years, going on 3. And then I have my third baby, and we're on the brink of divorce. He's using drugs and drinking, and I had given that up. In fact, I should say the Lord really delivered me when I became a mother. One by one, he began to deliver me of my vices and give me such a wonderful conviction. And I want the listeners to hear that when God convicts you, it's wonderful because it comes with a grace to obey. When the enemy condemns you, it's horrific because it comes with shame and hopelessness. But when the Lord and the Holy Spirit convicts you, it comes with a hope that you can do it. It never comes with a shame that you're so dirty and stuck and you'll never get out of this pit. That is a message from hell. And so one by one, I'm getting better. And I'm thinking that when I meet...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kimberly. We cannot let that go by. That was such a powerful statement. Let's reel that one back in just a tad.
Okay.
That is so, so powerful because first of all, you're driven with the birth of your son. You make this decision. You can go this way and continue your life of party and fun, or you can go this way. And that is back towards God because of your memories of him and for what you feel is the best for your son. And no one can stop you at that moment. And that you didn't become overwhelmed with your shame. I mean, you're walking into a church with a bunch of old people, painfully unmarried and a painfully young mom. I mean, sign in red letters, who you are as a person. And you could have felt so much shame and guilt. But what you just said, the conviction came with hope. And I think that's so beautiful. I could talk about that the rest of the day. That is such a great statement. And that was such a blessing that whole concept within you was just a true gift of grace again. So I just had
truly supernatural. Truly supernatural, Jane, because I didn't know what grace was. I didn't know what conviction versus condemnation was. But God shows up where we're at. He meets us where we are, and he knows what we need to take that next step. And so I didn't ever see myself as like having accomplished something amazing by giving up that old lifestyle. I always saw myself as a product of a miracle because I knew even in my short years of teenage years of rebellion, I had addictions, real ones. I had very real addictions because if you would have said, you have to stop doing that tomorrow, I would have gone crazy. And so whether they were physical addictions or psychological addictions, I was addicted. And so when I look back on that, I knew it was the grace of God that set me free. But here's the thing. I thought my husband had experienced that same grace of God and that he was sober. And I thought that both of us had put that lifestyle in the past when I married him. And that's what he told me. And it wasn't until we were into the marriage about 3 years, just about, that I discovered, you know what, he wasn't honest. And he's still very much living that old life. He just was doing it on the weekends. And so here I was, a young mom of 3 kids under the age of 5, and I'm doing it alone every weekend because he's at the bar or he slept at a friend's, or, and I'm just like, this is not what I signed up for. So at 20 years old, I went to see, I moved in with my mom, and I was going to get a divorce. And this really sparked a significant change for us. He came home. He said, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. He went into treatment. I also went back home to make this marriage work. And out of my hunger, true hunger for God, and also I'm going to call it a bit of desperation, a lot of desperation, I cried out to God and just said, God, I know about you. I know a lot of things about you, but I really don't know what it means to live for you. But if you show me how to do that, I will do it. And this sparked a whole bunch of changes in our life. We met people who brought us to a beautiful church. We began to worship in church together. We had like kind of a season of hope in our marriage, a season of growth in the Lord. And really what happened is we ended up in a different church that had some pretty strict teachings about marriage, about divorce. And all I can say to you is I discovered that my husband wasn't totally done with his addictions. I continued to catch him in lies. I continued to catch him using. And I became a person who believed that a submissive, godly wife just zips her lip and prays. Talks to her husband once, maybe twice, but she doesn't nag, Jean, and then goes to prayer. And I'm here to tell you to give that counsel to someone who's in a marriage with an addict. It's poison. It's just so dangerous. I didn't know that accountability was his best friend. It was his biggest hope for sobriety. And so instead of coming alongside him and being an accountability partner and a person who would shine the light and bring hope and truth, I helped cover up. I helped enable. I didn't even know what the word enabler meant. In my mind, I was trying so hard to please God. I thought that would please the Lord if I would suffer silently and trust him with my husband. And I share that message far and wide because I want, whether you're a man or a woman in a relationship, whether it's at work or at home, if someone is in a pattern of destructive behavior, love interrupts that pattern. Love doesn't help that pattern. And I had tried to interrupt it to no avail. And so my plan B was, I'm going to just trust the Lord. And long story very short, he got worse and the situation got worse. And the addiction got worse, the lies got worse, the misery got worse, the powerlessness got worse, the fear got worse, and the dysfunction got worse. All the while, I'm studying the Bible, I'm going to church, I'm seeking God like I never sought him, I'm homeschooling my children, teaching them about the Lord. I mean, what a paradox. We're living in this household that's unraveling while we're trying to teach our kids the hope and life that you can find in Christ.
Describe alone in 2007. You talked about this aloneness that kind of overwhelmed you throughout these years. Tell us how alone felt at that moment.
Well, I'm so glad to say that during my marriage to someone who was very emotionally unavailable, and most people struggling with any kind of addiction, their emotions are going into that thing, whatever it is. So I felt like a woman whose husband had another lover. And it was that, I'll call it aloneness magnified, that really forced me. I began to say to the Lord, what can I do with this gnawing sense of abandonment that I cannot escape since I was 7 years old? And that was when the Lord said to me, let me be your husband. Let me love you. And you let me love you. And then you love him the way you want to be loved.
Mhm.
even if he can't give it back to you. And that became my testing. Can you love him the way you want to be loved, even though you won't get it from him? But I promise you'll get it from me. And so during the marriage, I began to live like the Lord was my husband and he was my children's father. And so when I became a single mother with 10 of my 11 kids from age 18 months to 17 years, 10 children between those ages, I already had a husband and his name was Jesus. And I already had a father for my children and he was God the Father. And so when I would have a rough parenting day, I kid you not, I would go get in my 15 passenger van and just picture that. And I would go for a drive and I would be talking to an empty passenger seat, talking to the Lord as if I would go, did you hear how your sons just talked to me? And I would say to him what I would say to my actual godly husband, if I had one. Did you hear how your son, what are you going to do about it? And I said that to the Lord one day. I said, what are you going to do about these unruly, rebellious teenage boys? They are running roughshod over your wife, you know?
And
I mean,
all
I
sane
was so
people have had
little.
these conversations. That's what's
For
funny.
sure. This is sanity. And so this is what I tell people when I tell that story, not to scare your children, but 3 months later, those teenage boys were in military school
Uh,
by way of a complete miracle. And I'm talking an elite military school, boarding school, and we're talking about 5 figures for each one. And I was on welfare. I didn't pay a penny. Okay.
wow.
That's what my husband, their father, did. And it changed the trajectory of both of their lives. Those boys today are just knock it out of the park because of God's intervention. Their father was faithful.
Yeah.
I mean, I had to make so many hard decisions. It would break somebody's brain. I was deciding about never just my life, but typically 12 people's lives, and trying to pay the bills, and trying to meet these emotional needs. And it's an impossible task for anyone. I promise you that. And so I look back on those days as a single mother, and they're a blur. They really are, because the amount of strain on me was it's incomprehensible. I don't say that for pity. I just say because if I can get through that and come out on the other side, I basically did the impossible with God. I did the impossible. I held my family together, and somehow we're here on the other side of that. And that somehow equals supernatural help from the Lord.
Talking all around it, you haven't used the word yet. Tell me about this confidence that's exuding as you say those words. What is that?
Oh, um, okay. So I tell people there's 3 levels of faith. It starts with hope. We really hope that promise is true.
Mhm.
Hope grows if we meditate on the promise and develops into faith. Faith is like belief, and suddenly we're at phase 2. Phase 2 is I believe that's going to happen. I believe that promise will come true for me. But stage 3 comes if you stick it out with God and you let him show you who he really is. Stage 3 is knowing. I don't have to hope. I don't even have to believe. I know my God is faithful. I saw the Red Sea parted. I mean, I will tell you what, I was a single mom of, 10 kids. And I would say, Lord, you fed the Israelites with manna. You will feed us. Well, one day, on Monday morning, I open up my door to the porch, and there are literally those plastic crates stacked full of bread. We had manna on the porch every Monday. I'm like, who is putting this bread here? I had no idea how I would open the door, stacks. I began to give bread away. I am now a reservoir, a river of generosity, because there's too much for me and my kids. My freezer was full. We couldn't eat it fast enough. I'm giving manna away. This is how God provides for you. It doesn't matter what your situation is on paper. Like I said, I was on food stamps. I was on state medical assistance. I was working 5 jobs at one point to pay the bills. We almost lost our home and we're going to be homeless. And yet I have all this food. I can't even keep. I'm giving it away. And that was just one example. I mean, God is such a God of meeting every single need that
Yeah.
at times when I worry, I actually laugh at myself. Like, why are you worrying? Recap some of your own stories, sister, you know?
Right. Exactly. Okay. So you start your business, you're doing coaching, you're speaking, you're doing parent classes and seminars. This guy walks by.
Okay, so
You're
this one
still
goes
praying
out
for
to
that
you,
husband.
single moms. Yeah, single moms, this one is for you. So many women have said to me, when you were a single mom with that many children, weren't you so afraid you would never marry again? Because who would marry a woman with that many kids? And my answer is always the same. I never was once afraid. And I get the same response. How were you not afraid? I have 2 children and I'm terrified. That's too much baggage for the man of my dreams. And I say, because all those years that I held on for a beautiful family, a beautiful marriage, and a godly husband, God promised me I would have those things. And when my first marriage ended in divorce and my family sat in rubble, that didn't mean God didn't keep his word. It meant he didn't keep his word yet. The best word you have to cling to is yet. Because I just knew, well, if it wasn't with him, then it's with somebody else. And I never once thought, no one's going to want me. I thought, God has my guy. He promised me all that time. So I'm going to church with my row full of children. And
2
there's
rows.
this
What are you
man
talking
there.
about?
Yeah, the whole row. And he actually will tell the story. It's so funny. He's like, well, my sister would, her daughters, she had 4 daughters, and they always brought friends to church. Otherwise, they didn't want to come. So
Right.
when I saw Kim and this row full of kids, I thought it was her kids and their friends, or her kids and their cousins. And he said, turns out, nope, they were all her kids.
Every one of them.
So, every one of them. And so he's so funny. He began to just be kind. He was kind to me. He was kind to my children. And one day I come out, I can't find my little ones, like 4 or 5 of the littlest ones, except the baby's on my hip, but the other ones are missing. And I look out the window of the church and they're climbing all over some guy's Harley. And I just fly out there like any mother would. Get off that bike because we can't afford to fix scratched paint, kids.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so I'm pulling my 3-year-old off the bike and he's like, no, I told him he could sit up there. Well, this leads into him inviting us to the zoo, to which I was super offended. And he's
Why were you offended?
wow. Oh, I was so offended. You have to remember, I had spent years being on guard for manipulation. Okay. Years of lies and manipulation. And so when he invited me to the zoo in front of my children, I thought, what a slime ball. He knows darn well that if he asks in front of my kids, I have to say yes.
You have to say yes.
And so I am just like, what a player. He's trying to get to me through my kids, And so I literally looked at him like, you got to be kidding me. And my look was so obvious that his next question was, did I just offend you? To which I said, yeah. So he said what any smart man would say, never mind to the zoo, never mind. Questions off the table. You have a wonderful, lovely day with your children. And off he went.
Adios.
But he just left the conversation. He didn't leave the mission.
Yeah.
He was going to talk to me again, and he was going to make sure I understood what he meant by, would you like to go to the zoo? And it's so funny now because he says, I'm telling you, you would think I asked her to the no-tell motel with the look on her face. Yeah. So, but anyway, that conversation where he was going to explain to me turned into 2.5 hours, which turned into hours of conversation, which turned into, I had never spoken to such an engaging man in my life who actually wanted to know my history, wanted to know what my children and I had been through, wanted me to help him understand what those dynamics were. And he had absolutely no background in addiction, no addicts in his family, that wasn't part of his story or his first marriage. And so he had no idea. He's like, I'm a clean canvas. Teach me everything. And I thought, what guy asks a woman to teach him something? First of all, I'm like, this guy is either really good or he's really good, you know? And so
He's good.
he had my attention. And so, just to make that story very short, we got married 2 years later. And in 2011, he had one, I had 11. Our Brady Bunch is very, very, very not symmetrical. And we had a dozen children and a new life and a lot of shrapnel to still clean up and pull out, a lot of rubble to sift through together, and a lot of different kinds of hardship, even in the new, beautiful beginning. And in that time, the Lord said to me, it's time for you to take all the beauty that I've given you for ashes and share it and give people hope, give people tools, give people faith, whatever it is they need, give it to them. And the best way I can describe it, Jean, is I became a hope dealer. I could honestly look at anyone in the room and say, I don't care how bad it is, I've probably been there. Divorce, death, I buried a baby. I buried my mother at 22. I've endured abuse, bankruptcy, every kind of loss, poverty, even one stretch of my life where I can say I really lost all hope. I had one period when my oldest was 17 where I lost all hope for a season. And I have made it through all of that. And so whatever you need today, you can borrow from me. You need faith, borrow mine. You need hope, borrow mine. You need to know, borrow my knowing. You need a promise, borrow mine, because guess what? God lets everybody share. He's such a giver. Right. All of his promises are yes and amen for all of his children. So you can even borrow my promises and make them your own. And that's really the mission I've been on ever since.
So Kimberly, in the midst of all this, and as your healing came in your new marriage, you started a wonderful organization. I love the name of it, the Fellowship of Extraordinary Women. Tell me about the beginning of that and your purpose there.
Yes. So I was coaching and attracting a lot of women, into my business life and coaching life, a lot of women needing the message I have. And when you say yes to being a hope dealer, that is what ends up happening. And so I find myself with all these like-minded women, a lot of women entrepreneurs, a lot of women growing in their faith, wanting to get better at boundaries and emotional resilience and relationships and expand their reach to reach more people. And during that season, God gave me a vision for a network of women that were passionate about faith, family, and business. Those are my big three. God first, family second, business third. And I found many women feel that way as well. They want God to be a part of their business life and they want to reach people for the kingdom. And so I envisioned this network where we could all be growing together. We could be expanding our reach, a place where the Fellowship of Extraordinary Women, can help women publish their stories. I envisioned a publishing branch, life coaching institute, so that the way that God raised me up to help people, I could raise others up to help people through coaching. It's such a powerful medium. It's such a powerful tool. An effective way to help people, because you're not telling people what to do. You're just asking good questions and people are discovering what they need to do. So it's just been this beautiful thing. And that's exactly what Few does. We have a monthly network, a monthly meeting, publishing, a coaching institute, and leadership training. And we're reaching women all over the globe. It's just been a huge joy, a privilege, and such a blessing to see what God is doing with one yes.
It's so fun to see the influence that you have when you have organizations like this and what you're doing globally and what you're doing for women to help them voice their story and encourage others. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you for having me. It's been such an honor to be here.
So what will you learn from Kimberly's story? First of all, Christ is not scared away by our circumstances. Secondly, Christ is standing right there beside us with open arms, waiting for us to turn to Him for help and our resources. Number 3, Christ will turn bad things into good situations just to get our attention sometimes, just as He did with the birth of Jesse for Kimberly. Peace.